Gunshots echoed in the hallway in the middle of math class. Students panicked, but retired teacher Margaret Henderson simply locked the door and said calmly, "Get behind the desks." Then a student who saw the faded tattoo on her arm froze, because that was a mark only Green Berets earned. Welcome to the Real Life Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of courage, sacrifice, and hidden heroism, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Margaret Henderson was 67 years old and had been teaching mathematics at Jefferson High School for 42 years. Students called her Mrs. H and knew her as the most patient and understanding teacher in the entire mathematics department. She had never married, dedicating her life entirely to education, and had touched the lives of thousands of students throughout her distinguished career. Her classroom was legendary at Jefferson High, room 237 on the second floor, overlooking the school's courtyard where ancient oak trees provided shade during lunch breaks. The walls were covered with mathematical theorems, inspirational quotes, and photos of graduating classes spanning 4 decades. Margaret kept every thank you note from students, filing them in a special cabinet that had grown to contain over 3,000 letters of gratitude. There was always perfect order in her classroom. Her whiteboard was immaculate, desks arranged in precise rows, and her relationship with students was warm but disciplined. Despite being 67, she remained remarkably energetic, arriving at school every morning at 6:30 a.m., a full hour before classes began. She used this time to prepare detailed lessons, grade papers with meticulous care, and often helped struggling students who came early for extra tutoring. Everyone at Jefferson High School loved Margaret Henderson. Principal Williams often said she was the backbone of the entire institution. Fellow teachers sought her advice on everything from curriculum planning to handling difficult students. Even the custodial staff, led by old Mr. Garcia, had deep respect for her. She learned everyone's name, remembered their birthdays, and always had encouraging words during tough times. Margaret's teaching style was uniquely effective. She made mathematics come alive through real-world applications, often drawing from experiences that her students never questioned. When teaching geometry, she would describe perfect angles with military precision that seemed almost too exact for a civilian teacher. When explaining trajectory problems, her calculations were so accurate, they seemed to come from practical experience rather than textbooks. But Margaret Henderson had a past her students never knew about, a past that would soon become the difference between life and death. Margaret Henderson's military career began in 1978, when she was just 22 years old, fresh out of college with a mathematics degree and a burning desire to serve her country. At that time, women in combat roles were virtually non-existent, but Margaret had something special that caught the attention of military recruiters, an exceptional aptitude for both advanced mathematics and crisis management under extreme pressure. She enlisted initially as a military medical specialist, but this was largely a cover identity. In reality, Margaret was selected for a highly classified program that was recruiting women for special operations support roles. The program, known internally as Silent Angels, was designed to place female operatives in positions where they could gather intelligence and provide critical support to Special Forces teams without raising suspicion. Margaret's real training took place at a remote facility in North Carolina, where she spent 8 intensive months learning skills that went far beyond medical support. Combat medicine, yes, but also tactical planning, advanced weapons training, hand-to-hand combat, and psychological operations. She learned to shoot with deadly accuracy, to move silently through hostile territory, and to make split-second decisions under extreme pressure that could mean the difference between life and death. Between 1979 and 1985, Margaret participated in operations that officially never happened: Honduras, El Salvador, Grenada, and several missions that remain classified even decades later. Operating under various cover identities, sometimes as a nurse, sometimes as a teacher, occasionally as a journalist, she provided critical intelligence and support to Green Beret teams conducting operations throughout Central America during some of the most dangerous years of the Cold War. The faded tattoo on her arm told a real story. It wasn't just a combat medical specialist mark. It was the insignia of Operation Silent Angel, a program so classified that fewer than 200 people knew of its existence. The design was deceptively simple: a cross representing medical service, a star representing special operations, all contained within a triangle representing the three core principles of the program: precision, protection, and silence. Margaret had earned that tattoo during her third mission, a rescue operation in El Salvador, where her quick thinking and medical skills had saved the lives of an entire Green Beret team trapped behind enemy lines. She had performed emergency surgery in a jungle cave while under fire, using mathematics to calculate precise drug dosages and surgical angles in conditions that would have broken most people. When the Silent Angel program was quietly disbanded in 1985, Margaret was offered a chance to transition to regular special forces or military intelligence. Instead, she chose to return to civilian life, taking with her a lifetime commitment to never speak about her service. She had seen too much, done too much, and lost too many friends. Teaching mathematics seemed like a peaceful way to serve her country by educating the next generation. But as Margaret would soon discover, some skills never fade, and some instincts never die. November 15th, Tuesday, started like any other day at Jefferson High School. Margaret arrived at her usual time, 6:30 a.m., and immediately began preparing for her advanced trigonometry lesson. She had been teaching this particular unit for 42 years, but she still spent considerable time perfecting her approach, always looking for new ways to help students understand complex mathematical concepts. Room 237 was her sanctuary. The morning sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating mathematical formulas written in her precise handwriting on the whiteboard. Margaret had developed her own teaching methodology over the decades, combining traditional mathematical instruction with practical applications that helped students see the relevance of what they were learning. As students began arriving for first period, Margaret greeted each one personally. There was Sarah Mitchell, a brilliant student with aspirations of becoming an aerospace engineer, whose father worked at the local aerospace company. Jake Rodriguez, whose family had immigrated from Mexico when he was young, and who showed remarkable aptitude for advanced mathematics despite struggling with English. Marcus Thompson, whose father was a retired Army sergeant, and who often asked questions that showed unusual interest in military applications of mathematics. There was Emma Chun, the youngest in the class at just 16, who had skipped a grade and was already taking advanced trigonometry. Tyler Brooks, a quiet student who showed signs of mathematical genius, but lacked confidence in his abilities. Ashley Martinez, who struggled with math but never gave up, often staying after class for extra help. Class 3A had 25 students total, and Margaret knew intimate details about each one. She knew that David's parents were going through a difficult divorce, that Michelle was working a part-time job to help support her family, that Carlos was dealing with bullying from older students. A good teacher, Margaret had learned over 4 decades, taught more than just subject matter. They taught life skills, confidence, and resilience. At 10:45 a.m., Margaret was in the middle of explaining the relationship between sine and cosine functions when she asked her traditional question: can anyone explain how these trigonometric relationships might apply in real-world situations? Sarah raised her hand immediately. In engineering, Mrs. H. My dad says they use trigonometry to calculate structural loads and angles in aircraft design. Margaret smiled warmly. Sarah always made the connections between mathematics and practical applications. Excellent, Sarah. And can anyone think of other applications? Marcus raised his hand eagerly. Military applications, Mrs. H? Like calculating artillery trajectories or navigation. Margaret paused for just a moment. Marcus often asked about military applications, probably influenced by his father's service. Yes, Marcus. Military engineers use trigonometry for precisely those calculations. What Margaret didn't say was that she had personally used these exact calculations in combat situations, determining precise angles for medical evacuations under fire, calculating trajectory paths for supply drops, and using mathematical formulas to plan extraction routes through hostile territory. It was 10:47 a.m. when their normal day ended forever. The first sound was barely audible, a sharp crack that might have been a door slamming or a book dropping. Margaret's head turned instantly toward the hallway, her expression changing from warm teacher to something much more alert and focused. Her military training had taught her to distinguish between normal building sounds and potential threats. The second sound was unmistakable. Margaret's blood ran cold as the sharp report of gunfire echoed through the hallway outside room 237. Several students looked up with mild curiosity, but Margaret was already moving with purpose and precision. "Silence," she commanded, her voice carrying authority that immediately cut to the classroom chatter. The tone was so different from her usual gentle teaching voice that every student instantly froze. This wasn't Mrs. H asking for attention. This was a military command delivered with absolute authority. Margaret moved swiftly to the door, her movements precise and economical. She turned the deadbolt and engaged the secondary lock that most teachers never used. Then she moved to the windows, quickly closing the blinds to prevent outside observation of the classroom. "Everyone move away from the windows and get behind the desks," Margaret ordered, her voice calm but carrying unmistakable urgency. "Now, quietly." The students began to move, confusion evident on their faces. Some were starting to understand that this wasn't a drill. The sounds from the hallway were getting louder, shouting, running footsteps, what sounded like locker doors slamming. "Mrs. H, what's happening?" asked Jake, his voice tight with growing fear. Margaret was at the window, carefully adjusting the blind to peer outside. In the parking lot, she could see teachers and students running toward their cars. Some were on cell phones, others were simply running. Through her trained eye, she could assess the situation developing outside while maintaining awareness of the threat inside the building. "There appears to be an emergency situation in the school," Margaret said calmly, moving back toward her students. "We're going to wait here safely until the authorities resolve the situation." But Margaret was already thinking tactically. 2 shooters, based on the sound patterns, moving systematically through the building. Not random, this was planned. They would likely move floor by floor, checking classrooms. Room 237 was on the second floor, northeast corner. Multiple escape routes from this position, but the windows were too high for safe evacuation without equipment. As Margaret moved around the classroom, ensuring all blinds were closed and that students were positioned safely behind desks, her long-sleeved cardigan shifted, revealing more of the faded tattoo on her forearm. Marcus Thompson, crouched behind his desk in the front row, had the clearest view. His father, Sergeant First Class David Thompson, retired, had taught him to recognize military insignia and symbols. What he saw on Mrs. Henderson's arm made his breath catch. The tattoo was faded but unmistakable. A triangle containing a cross and star, with small text beneath that he couldn't quite make out. But Marcus had seen similar markings in his father's military albums. This wasn't some decorative tattoo from Margaret's youth. This was military. Special operations military. "Mrs. H," Marcus whispered, trying to keep his voice low. "That tattoo on your arm. I think I recognize it." Margaret turned toward Marcus, and for just a moment, he saw something in her eyes that confirmed his suspicion. This wasn't the gentle math teacher he'd known for 2 years. This was someone else entirely, someone with training, experience, and capabilities that went far beyond trigonometry. Other students had noticed a change in their teacher. Sarah, always observant, had seen how Mrs. Henderson moved. Not like a 67-year-old teacher, but with a fluid efficiency of someone much younger and far more trained. Emma had noticed how Mrs. Henderson's eyes constantly scanned the room and the windows, always aware of multiple things at once. "I do have some experience with emergency situations," Margaret admitted carefully. "A long time ago, before I became your teacher, I had training that's relevant to keeping people safe. And right now, that training is telling me that we need to stay calm, stay quiet, and wait for help to arrive. When Jake asked if she was military, Margaret hesitated. For 40 years, she had successfully kept her two lives separate. But now, with gunfire echoing to the halls and 25 young lives depending on her, that separation was dissolving. Yes, she said simply. I was. And everything I learned then is focused on making sure all of you get home safely today. With her secret partially revealed, Margaret felt a familiar clarity descending over her. The classroom transformed in her mind from an educational space to a tactical environment. She quickly assessed their resources and options while maintaining her protective stance. Sarah, call 911. Tell them there are active shooters at Jefferson High School. That classroom 237 on the second floor has 26 people safe and secure, and that we need immediate law enforcement response. As Sarah made the call with trembling hands, Margaret turned to Marcus. Marcus, your father taught you about military procedures, didn't he? Marcus nodded firmly. Yes, ma'am. He was in the Army for 20 years. Good. I need you to help me move these desks to create a barrier by the door. Can you do that quietly? Marcus immediately understood. Together, they began repositioning the heavy wooden desks to create a defensive barrier that would slow down any intruder while providing cover for students. Margaret then addressed Jake and Tyler. I need you two to position yourselves by the windows. Not in front of them, but where you can see out. If you see police arriving, you'll signal to me immediately. If you see anything else, anyone approaching the building who shouldn't be here, you'll also let me know. Emma, despite being the youngest, showed remarkable composure. Mrs. H., what can I do to help? Margaret smiled at the brave young woman. Emma, I need you to help keep everyone calm. Talk to the students who are most frightened. Use your quiet voice and remind them that we're going to be okay. From her desk drawer, Margaret retrieved items that most teachers didn't carry. Zip ties, a tactical flashlight, and a folding knife. Her emergency kit was more comprehensive than her colleagues ever knew. The sounds in the hallway were getting closer. Margaret could distinguish two sets of footsteps, moving systematically from room to room. They were checking doors, looking for unlocked classrooms or easy targets. Her door was locked, but that wouldn't stop determined attackers for long. Margaret positioned herself tactically, removing her cardigan to reveal arms that were clearly more muscled and capable than they appeared under her usual teacher attire. At 67, Margaret Henderson was in far better physical condition than anyone suspected. The footsteps stopped outside room 237. Margaret held up her hand for absolute silence as 25 students froze in perfect stillness. The door handle rattled as someone tested it. Who's there? Margaret called out in her most authoritative voice. This is a locked classroom with students inside. You need to identify yourselves immediately. Open this door. We're police, came the aggressive response. Margaret's expression hardened. That wasn't police protocol. Real police would have identified themselves properly, would have used specific language, and would have been coordinating with school administration. I need to see proper identification through the door window. Margaret called back. School policy requires verification before allowing access to classrooms during emergency situations. This bought her a few more minutes, but Margaret knew it was temporary. The pounding on the door became more violent as the attackers grew impatient. Open this door or we'll break it down. Margaret palmed the folding knife, keeping it concealed but ready. She positioned herself at an angle to the door that would give her maximum tactical advantage when it opened. Students, she said quietly, close your eyes and cover your ears. Do not watch what happens next. Do not listen. Just keep yourselves safe. But before the door could be broken down, the sound of police sirens began to echo from outside the building. Multiple units, growing closer rapidly. The voices outside the door changed tone, from aggressive confidence to urgent concern as they realized law enforcement was arriving. Margaret heard rapid footsteps moving away from her door, back down the hallway toward what she assumed were escape routes. She didn't relax. knowing that corner attackers were often more dangerous than confident ones. 20 minutes later, when proper police response arrived at her door, Margaret recognized correct protocols and carefully opened it to tactical officers. Their leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, immediately assessed the situation. Student safe, teacher clearly in control, defensive preparations that went beyond normal civilian responses. After the crisis ended and students were safely evacuated, Rodriguez approached Margaret privately. "Ma'am, you handled that situation with more tactical awareness than most civilians. Do you have a military background?" Margaret looked at this professional who had risked his life to protect her school. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I served in the military long ago. Some training stays with you." In the months that followed, Margaret's relationship with her students evolved as her secret became partially known. At graduation, she was asked to address the class of 2024, standing at the podium thinking about her journey from classified operations to trigonometry lessons. "Dear students," she began, "the greatest victories in life come not from conquering others, but from helping others discover their own strength. Every experience prepares us for moments when we're called to be more than we thought possible. Teachers like Margaret represent thousands of educators who bring their life experiences into the classroom, teaching through example that heroism comes in many forms, and that the most powerful lessons are often taught not through words, but through actions.